If you took the global healthcare industry and just turned it into its own sovereign country, it would actually be the fifth largest greenhouse gas emitter on the planet,
Wow. Yeah.
which is, I mean, that's nearly 5% of all global emissions. So today's deep dive is really about how the industry that makes, the life-saving pills sitting in your bathroom cabinet is quietly trying to stop killing the planet.
Right. But without compromising the actual medicine you rely on, which is the really tricky part.
Exactly. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone. We are unpacking a comprehensive strategy document today, and it focuses on a movement known as Green Pharma 4.0.
Yeah. And our mission here is to really explore how the pharmaceutical industry is completely rewiring its operating models, its supply chains, its factories.
Because whether you work in a corporate environment or you invest in markets or honestly just have a medicine cabinet at home, you should care about this. Understanding how this heavily regulated, slow-moving behemoth of an industry is fundamentally transforming. Well, it gives you a blueprint for the future of all global businesses.
It really does. And what's fascinating here is that we are looking at a total shift from, surface level public relations to deep structural operational engineering.
Right.
Because for the longest time, a pharma company's definition of sustainability was just publishing an annual ESG report.
Okay, let's unpack this because I definitely remember those reports. I mean, they were basically just glossy PDFs, right?
Oh, exactly. A PR exercise.
Yeah, they'd install a few solar panels on the roof of the corporate headquarters, maybe announce some initiative to reduce printer paper, and just call it a day. It's like putting a shiny solar panel on a leaky house.
That is the perfect analogy, and those were the early days of corporate social responsibility. But the strategic document we are analyzing today makes it very clear that this old approach is just entirely obsolete now.
Because the regulators, right, they're forcing them to actually rip open the walls and fix the plumbing.
Yes. The regulatory landscape has shifted drastically. So, for example, the European Union recently introduced the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD.
Right, the CSRD.
Yeah, and this mandates incredibly rigorous sustainability reporting rules applied to the 2024 financial year, with all that data going public in 2025.
So this isn't some, abstract 2050 goal.
Yeah.
The clock is actively ticking right now.
The pressure is immediate. But the core driver that's forcing them to completely rethink their operations is something called Scope 3 emissions.
Scope 3. I hear this thrown around a lot in corporate sustainability. So Scope 1 is the gas you burn in your own factory, and Scope 2 is the electricity you buy from the grid. What makes Scope 3 so uniquely complicated?
Well, Scope 3 encompasses everything outside a company's own factory gates, so the entire value chain.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and in pharmaceuticals, that chain is a complete labyrinth. I mean, you have the raw material suppliers mining the base minerals.
Right.
You have the manufacturers making the active pharmaceutical ingredients. You have excipient suppliers, third-party testing labs, and this incredibly energy-intensive cold chain logistics network.
So basically everything.
Everything. The vast majority of a pharma company's environmental impact happens out there, completely out of their direct control.
I read an analogy for this recently that I loved. It's like trying to claim you're a strict vegetarian, but you are actively paying 5 other people to eat steaks on your behalf.
Yes.
And Scope 3 basically means the regulators are finally counting those steaks.
That captures the dynamic perfectly. If a contracted trucking company driving your vaccines across the country burns 1,000 gallons of diesel, well, that is legally your Scope 3 emission. You are responsible for it.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. And this is why Green Pharma 4.0 shifts the entire paradigm. Companies can't just ask, what do we report anymore? They have to ask, how do we operate differently to stop those emissions from happening in the first place?
Which naturally leads us to the supply chain. Because if the problem is out in the supply chain, you have to fundamentally change how materials move. And I know in consumer goods, the big buzzword is circularity, right? Bending a linear process into a loop. Like, you buy a plastic water bottle, you recycle it, it becomes a park bench.
Right, the classic circular economy.
But in pharma, I mean, you can't exactly recycle a used syringe or a half-empty pill bottle. The safety risks are just insane. So how on earth does a circular supply chain actually work here without endangering the patient?
You hit on the absolute most critical constraint in the industry there. Circular pharma does not mean careless reuse.
Right, I would hope not.
Yeah, reverse logistics like take-back models where patients return unused medicines, those are incredibly risky. You just cannot reintroduce a returned drug into the supply chain because you lose the chain of custody.
Oh, but you don't know where it's been.
Exactly. You don't know if it was stored at the right temperature. You have to worry about tamper evidence, counterfeiting, and above all, sterility. Sterility is just non-negotiable.
So if they aren't recycling the physical medicine itself, what are they actually looping back?
The focus shifts heavily upstream. It's about sustainable procurement and packaging. Instead of dealing with the waste at the end, they change what enters the system in the first place.
Okay, makes sense.
So they evaluate suppliers based on their carbon footprint, their water usage, their waste management. And our sources highlight a massive supplier collaboration initiative called the Energize program.
Energize. What does that do?
Well, big pharmaceutical companies are actually actively stepping in to help their smaller suppliers transition to renewable energy.
Wait, really? Like tutoring them? Or actually paying for it?
Okay.
Because I'm imagining a tiny supplier in, say, rural India making the cardboard for pillboxes. They might not have the capital to just go build a solar farm.
Oh, it goes far beyond tutoring. The large pharma companies are leveraging their massive corporate buying power to essentially co-sign or aggregate renewable energy contracts for these smaller suppliers.
Oh, wow. So they're literally underwriting the transition.
Yes. It is corporate self-interest driving global green infrastructure. Because, if that cardboard supplier burns coal, the main pharma company's Scope 3 emissions spike.
That makes total sense. They're basically protecting their own balance sheet by greening the little guys.
Yeah.
But what about the drugs themselves? You mentioned changing what enters the system. Does this mean they're actually changing the medicine?
This brings us to a really fascinating concept called green chemistry. The focus isn't just on the cardboard box, it's on rethinking the chemical synthesis of the drug itself.
How so? I mean, chemistry is just chemistry, isn't it? Molecules binding together.
Well, yes, but the way those molecules bind requires tremendous energy.
Okay.
A traditional chemical synthesis might require boiling industrial solvents at, 150 degrees Celsius for 24 hours straight.
Wow.
Yeah, going through 10 different chemical steps, producing toxic chemical waste at every single stage. So green chemistry asks, can we find a new catalyst that allows this reaction to happen at room temperature?
Oh, I see.
Can we redesign the process to only take 3 steps instead of 10? Can we use safer solvents that don't require specialized, highly energy-intensive disposal?
That is wild. So they are fundamentally changing the recipe of how the medicine is cooked, basically. So the kitchen uses less power and creates less toxic waste.
Exactly, and they are applying that exact same redesign mentality to secondary packaging, too.
Like what?
Like designing reusable cold chain shipping containers that can hold their temperature longer without needing as much dry ice. Or reducing the thickness of plastic blister packs by just microscopic amounts.
Oh, right. Just enough to save thousands of tons of plastic globally, but not enough to compromise the tamper evidence.
You got it.
Okay, but re-engineering a chemical process to happen at room temperature?
Right.
Or underwriting solar farms for cardboard suppliers in India? I mean, that sounds wildly expensive.
It definitely requires investment.
Right, so who is paying for this? Which brings us to the financial reality. The CFO has to be having a heart attack looking at these upfront costs.
Actually, the CFO's perspective is exactly what is driving this entire shift. For years, carbon was just a metric for the annual sustainability report. But now, carbon is becoming a hard, unavoidable financial variable.
The math is changing.
The math is completely changing.
Our sources specifically mention the EU Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, the CDAM. And I'll admit, reading through that part of the document was a little dense. Can you break down how that actually impacts the bottom line?
Sure. Think of the CBAM as a pollution toll booth at the European border.
Okay, I like that. A pollution toll booth.
Historically, a company might outsource its manufacturing to a country with very lax environmental regulations just to save money. They burn cheap coal, make the product, and ship it to Europe.
Right, the classic outsourcing playbook.
Exactly. But the CBAM is designed to stop that. If you try to import a product with high embedded carbon, the EU will calculate the emissions generated during its creation and basically charge you a tax at the border equal to what it would have cost to emit that carbon inside Europe.
Oh, wow. So outsourcing your pollution just doesn't save you money anymore? The regulators see it, they measure it, and they literally hand you a bill at the border.
Exactly. And while direct pharmaceutical products aren't the primary target of those specific tariffs at this exact second, the signal is flashing bright red across the global economy.
They know it's coming.
Yes.
Yes.
Embedded carbon in your industrial supply chain is becoming financially visible.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Think about a chief financial officer at one of these pharma giants. Normally, they ask a simple question, right? Like, what is the unit cost of this pill?
Factoring in labor, materials, overhead, yeah.
Right. But are you saying they now have to calculate a carbon-adjusted unit cost? Like treating carbon as an actual currency that fluctuates on a balance sheet?
That is exactly the new financial discipline. They have to treat it like a currency. Because when you factor in carbon taxes, emissions trading systems, internal carbon pricing, and the premiums charged by green suppliers, the CFO has to ask, what is our carbon-adjusted unit cost today? And how will it absolutely explode if energy prices spike or new regulations hit?
Meaning a drug that is incredibly cheap to manufacture today, but produces a ton of carbon, might actually become wildly uncompetitive and just too expensive to sell in the near future.
Precisely. If a business leader isn't factoring in the cost of carbon today, their financial models are fundamentally broken. A high-carbon product simply won't survive the market long term.
Okay, so if carbon is literally cash hitting the bottom line, the CFO is going to march down to the factory floor tomorrow and demand they start unplugging things to save money. Which brings us to the factories themselves, because the sources detail how ridiculously energy hungry these pharmaceutical plants are.
Oh, it's staggering. We aren't just talking about keeping the lights on here.
No, not even close. A 2025 reporting highlight from My Green Lab states that laboratories can consume up to 10 times more energy and 4 times more water than a typical office space. 10 times.
It's massive.
Where's all that power going?
It's all going toward maintaining strict environmental controls. You have these massive HVAC systems running 24/7 to maintain specific air pressure cascades, just ensuring contaminants don't float from a hallway into a clean room.
Oh, okay.
You have the clean rooms themselves filtering air hundreds of times an hour. You have freeze-drying processes that require extreme cold and extreme vacuums. And crucially, you have systems creating water for injection.
Okay, what makes water for injection so energy intensive? I mean, it's just clean water, right?
It's a way more than clean. It has to be absolutely flawlessly sterile to go directly into a human bloodstream.
Right.
And achieving that usually means boiling water into steam, condensing it back down, and keeping it constantly circulating at around 80 degrees Celsius, which is about 175 degrees Fahrenheit, just so bacteria cannot possibly grow in the pipes.
Oh my gosh. Heating and moving that water constantly must take an unbelievable amount of power.
It does.
So you really can't just tell the facility manager to turn down the thermostat at night to save a few bucks. You would ruin millions of dollars of vaccines, or, much worse, you'd hurt a patient.
Exactly. You cannot blindly reduce environmental controls.
No.
Everything in this industry revolves around GMP, good manufacturing practice.
Wait, I hear that acronym a lot. GMP. For the listener who isn't a pharma engineer, what does GMP actually encompass?
Good manufacturing practice is the rigorous system of regulations enforced by agencies like the FDA. It basically ensures that products are consistently produced and controlled according to quality standards.
Okay.
It covers everything from the training of the staff to the cleanliness of the facility and the reliability of the equipment. It is the absolute legal baseline for drug safety. If you violate GMP, you don't just get a fine. Your factory gets shut down and your drugs get recalled.
So you have a mandate from the CFO to cut energy, but a strict legal obligation from the FDA to maintain perfect, highly energy-intensive conditions. How do they thread that needle? Because the document talks heavily about AI and digital transformation here.
Right. The solution is converting these static systems into dynamic, intelligent ones. So take AI-based batch scheduling, for example.
Oh.
A factory has incredibly energy-intensive serialization cycles, but instead of just running them at random times, the AI analyzes the local power grid in real time. It waits for the exact hour when the grid is flooded with cheap, renewable solar or wind energy, and it automatically schedules the heavy machinery to run then.
That is brilliant. It's just matching the peaks. But what about the actual production lines? Because the document emphasizes these process digital twins. And honestly, this sounds to me like a video game, like a Sims version of your factory.
I love that analogy. A digital twin is a perfect virtual replica of the physical manufacturing process. It simulates the energy use, the chemical yields, the cycle times, and the quality outcomes.
So if a manager wants to see if they can, I don't know, turn down the temperature on a drying oven by 5 degrees to save power, they don't test it on a $50 million batch of real medicine. They test it on the digital twin. They essentially ask the simulation, hey, will this ruin the product?
And the simulation runs all the physics and chemistry models to give a definitive yes or no.
Yeah.
You combine that with digital energy management, and suddenly your monthly energy bill goes from being a static, accepted cost to a highly controllable variable.
Right.
But even with all this AI, there are strict guardrails. The strategy outlines 3 non-negotiable tests that every single sustainable change must pass before it goes from the virtual simulation to the real factory floor.
Let me guess. Test 1 has to be about actually reducing the carbon footprint.
Yes. Does it genuinely reduce the environmental impact?
Makes sense.
The second test is the ultimate veto. Does it preserve or improve product quality and patient safety? Because if there's even a fraction of a % increase in contamination risk, the idea is dead on arrival.
Right, because of GMP.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the third test is, does it create measurable business value or risk reduction?
Okay, I want to push back on this a bit, though. Green chemistry, digital twins, AI batch scheduling, I mean, it all sounds like a beautiful sci-fi utopia. But anyone who works adjacent to pharmaceuticals knows this industry is notoriously slow.
It is very slow.
It is drowning in FDA red tape, validation protocols, endless documentation. How are these massive, slow-moving giants supposed to implement a sci-fi utopia anytime soon?
That is exactly the friction point the strategy directly addresses. They acknowledge that you just cannot tackle this casually. So the document outlines a really aggressive 90-day action plan to force execution.
Okay, 90 days.
Yeah. Days 1 through 30 are entirely focused on baseline mapping.
Yeah.
Just finding the carbon hotspots in the factories and supply chains.
Because you can't optimize a system if you don't even know where the energy is bleeding out in the first place.
Right. Then days 31 to 60 are for prioritizing enterprise opportunities. What moves the needle the most? What is actually feasible given regulatory constraints?
Got it.
And then days 61 to 90 are for building the roadmap and securing executive sign-off. But the mechanism to make this actually stick is cross-functional governance. They propose creating a sustainability value office.
Oh, because if you just hand this to the sustainability team, they will write a great report, but nothing gets engineered on the floor.
Yes.
And if you hand it only to the engineers, well, they might inadvertently violate a GMP quality regulation while trying to save a single watt of power.
Exactly. Quality, regulatory, engineering, and supply chain departments all have to be locked in a room together from day one. But you've highlighted the absolute biggest bottleneck in this entire transition here.
Which is?
It isn't the technology. We have AI, we have sensors, we have green chemistry models. The real bottleneck is the people.
The workforce.
The workforce.
Because, you can buy a software license for a digital twin tomorrow,
Right.
but you can't just go out and hire 10,000 people who natively understand strict GMP compliance and complex carbon accounting. Those are two completely different languages.
Yeah. It
really is a total rewrite. I mean, we've gone from the era of PR-driven ESG reporting, slapping a shiny solar panel on the roof, to a deeply digital, carbon-aware, circular operating model. They're using virtual simulations and supply chain leverage to protect the planet's health, but completely without compromising the safety of the patient.
Exactly. It proves that industrial decarbonization and rigorous product safety are not mutually exclusive. When they're designed correctly, they actually reinforce one another.
Which is exactly why this deep dive matters. What we are seeing in Green Pharma 4.0 is a tangible blueprint. It shows how a massive, highly regulated industry can actually achieve net zero ambitions, not through empty promises, but through aggressive digital transformation and operational redesign.
Right.
And if the pharmaceutical industry can untangle this labyrinth, really any global business can. So as we wrap up today, what is the biggest takeaway you want to leave the listener with?
Well, I want you to think back to that concept of green chemistry we talked about and apply it to the medicines sitting in your own cabinet at home. We have always assumed that when scientists reformulate a drug, they are doing it solely to make it work better inside the human body, to cure a disease faster or to reduce side effects.
Sure, that's what we all assume.
But we are rapidly approaching a future where the actual chemical makeup of your medication might be fundamentally altered, not to make it more effective for you, but to ensure that the chemical synthesis process required to manufacture it is actually survivable for the planet.
Wow, that is a profound shift in perspective. It completely changes how you look at that little plastic pill bottle. We started today talking about how murky and complex this operational overhaul is, but it turns out with the right digital tools, the right training, and honestly a willingness to completely redesign the molecular process, these industries really can transform.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep exploring, and we'll catch you next time.